I went on holiday, I came back, and a lot of my plants are struggling. If you want to find out a bit more on what I'm doing to rehab my struggling plants, stick around and let's dive into it. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see something behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So as I just said, I've only just come back from holiday just over a week ago now, I think, yes. And when I came back, a lot of my plants have been struggling. You might be able to see some plants that you're used to seeing looking a bit more lush, looking a bit peaky. Thankfully, the male dense Philodendron is doing okay. But I wanted to kind of dive into this a bit more and kind of explain kind of how we got here, what I'm going to be doing to rehab, and kind of what has worked for me in the past. Also consider this to be your February update from the conservatory. It's going to be a doozy today. But before we dive into anything else, I just kind of want to clarify, I did have somebody taking care of my plants whilst I was away. They did a great job. This is no shade on the person that was taking care of the plants. This was more a failure on my part in terms of what I thought they could handle whilst I was away versus what they could actually handle. And I'll give you a bit more information. What I mean by that is that when I went away, considering that it was going to be quite cold, and it was very, very cold when I was away, I don't think I estimated the fact that it was going to be both cold and I think relatively bright, which meant that the conservatory was getting an awful lot of light. And this is something that a lot of us will tend to forget, especially in the winter, that just because it's cold doesn't always necessarily mean that it's going to be grey or dark. I'm going to say this one more time for the people in the UK, just because it's cold doesn't always mean that it's going to be dark. By and large, if we're in the UK, it generally means it's going to be dark or grey. But it doesn't always mean that. And I know there's a lot of people that watch this from the kind of more northern areas and cooler areas where you might get a lot of snow. I know I've got a lot of people that watch my videos from Canada. I would imagine it's probably quite true for you that you might still get very, very cold days, but you still might get very bright days, especially if there's snow and that's reflecting some of the light back into the house. Let us all know in the comments down below how you deal with that. But so the reason why my plants are struggling is because I thought they could handle less watering whilst I was away. Because by and large, a lot of the times when I go and come back and I'm just like, oh, I've forgotten a couple of plants or I've watered them a bit less, I come back and they're entirely fine. That wasn't the case this time around. And as I said, no shade on the person who took care of the plants. I am forever grateful and they did a really, really good job. It's just, as I said, my failing where I thought that they could kind of go for a bit longer without watering. So, shall we dive into things that are struggling and are now rehabbing, and I'll tell you what I'm doing to rehab. So, first thing that you might notice, and hopefully this might come up here. So this plant that I'm holding up right here is the Trevesia palmata, I think, which was the one that looks a bit like a snowflake, like a cut out snowflake from the foldy paper kind of cut up snowflakes that I got a while back in a different unboxing. And if I can find that video, I'll link it somewhere at the top. Very exciting. And it had done exceptionally well for me in the summer. I got loads of leaves. There was probably about 8 or 9 leaves on that plant. I am down now to 3 leaves. And let me just correct the almost falling down Aquarimelens that I've got here. Let's see if that will stay. Stay. Oh, it stayed. It listens. So yeah, the Trevesia has lost most of its leaves. It's down to the last 3 leaves now. And I'll see if I can pick that up actually. I just watered it the other day, so. Right, this is the sad state of why am I forgetting? My pinkleyi. And you might, for the people that have been here for a while, you might look at this and just go, it's okay, it's a relatively like a big and full plant. Look at all of those leaves. But I've probably lost about 40% of all of its leaves. And again, this is a time when I need to be looking at pests. And are there some mealybugs on this? Yes. Has this had mealybugs in the past? Yes. Has it really caused any issue? No. But you can see I had, and I say had because I think this one might be dead, I had a little offshoot here. I think that's dried up entirely now. It lost most of its leaves. You can kind of see from the petioles that I had to cut off, and I'm taking off now. Let me just count how many I've taken off. I've taken off at least 4 or 5 here. So that was 4 or 5 leaves that were lost. There's another offshoot here that might survive. There is a leaf on that, but I've got high hopes that the mother plant, the main plant, should be okay. But yeah, this has lost a lot of leaves, and you can see some of the crispy leaves that are happening at the bottom. This one has been struggling for a while, and if it does keep struggling, what I might do is move it out of semi-hydro and move it into soil. I am a bit hesitant to do that at this time of the year because a couple of others, and actually one specific Anthurium, which is such a shame. I'll show you that in a minute as well. That one's looking really bad. That one really should go into a prop box, which is my Anthurium arisaemoides. But the pinkleyi it's had better days, let's put it that way. As we're talking about the arisaemoides, I present you a moss pole, a pot, and a stick. This is the arisaemoides, which is why I'm saying I really should probably move this into a prop box, because to be fair, and I'm trying to figure out what is happening with this, and I don't know if this is even salvageable. This is the one that I did mention I'm probably going to have to repurchase because I don't think this is going to make it. I moved it onto moss pole way too late because it had already lost most of its leaves and it wasn't going to start rooting in. The interesting thing with this is the bottom stem here is still looking relatively plump, but if you look at the very top, that's quite wrinkly. So I'm assuming some of this might have been rot at some point or another. It probably still is rot. Quite how it's happening, it looks like it's moving from the top down, but I don't know. I don't think this is going to make it, but as I said, hopefully as soon as the weather warms up ever so slightly, and this is something interesting actually, if you're if you're importing plants, especially from companies that might take up to a month to deliver, you need to start thinking a bit ahead of yourself. So if I know that the weather should be kind of okay by April, May, I should be really putting in my order February, March time, just to make sure that I'm getting it in time. Because if I leave the order until May, June, I probably won't get it until the middle of the summer or towards the end. And I want to get my plants in, and it's a risk, I get this, because especially in the UK, it might be cold still at the time when it arrives, but it will have the best chance of success because we're going into the growing season rather than just getting it in the middle of the growing season or at the end of the growing season, and it doesn't have months of decent kind of growing conditions in front of it, and it might take a few months to kind of re-establish itself. So I want to time it around there. The people that know, and I'm assuming it's what we see a lot of the times when we're importing plants around that time of the year is where you don't get that many sales because the companies know that that's the time when they're going to sell, because that's a lot of the time when people might be purchasing, the ones that are thinking ahead. So yes, arisaemoides, unfortunately, I'm not calling time of death on this just yet, but let's be real, I really should be at this point. I'll show you another Anthurium just because we're doing Anthuriums generally at the moment. This was doing so well with the moss pole and everything. So this is the Magnificum X luxurians. Yes. And lost that leaf. I'm going to lose this leaf. That's its newest leaf. Hopefully that should be okay. I'm kind of looking at the roots in the bottom, and to be fair, they're still okay. You can kind of see that root there. But the more important thing is, look at that. Look at all of this security that I've got. And I think that's the important thing when I've talked about moss poles. You see, the moss pole isn't that large on this plant specifically. It doesn't need a huge moss pole, but look at all of this insurance that I've got on here. So if everything else had rotted down here, I can use what is in this moss pole. And I know I'm not the only one that's saying this. Sydney Plant Guy, a lot of other YouTubers, Instagrammers are all saying the same thing. Yes, and I know a lot of people don't want to do moss poles. I get it. For the people that do want to do moss poles, this is probably one of the major reasons why you would want to do it, is because you've then got security. If anything goes wrong, And to be fair, I think the only reason why this leaf isn't doing as badly as this leaf or this leaf is because of that moss pole there, basically. So that one's struggling a bit. I will hear a lot of you probably saying, oh, you've got Anthuriums. Why are you surprised that they're throwing a hissy fit? Everything else should be doing fine. How about a Homalomena that is looking less than happy at the moment? Look at that. And look at that. It's just not happy. Is it bringing out another flower? Yes. Thank you for the people that kind of explained what the inflorescences are like on this plant. So I just snapped that a bit just because, okay, and I get it, the plant is stressed now, so it's just like, let's take a bloom out and let's continue our genetic information before we die. So this I should be able to rehab again. I have listened to all of you. I think I need to give this less light, ironically enough. I was giving this way too much light. So some of this might be light damage, but a lot of this is probably going to be the main culprit, which I kind of alluded to in the beginning, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But yeah, this is one that is also struggling, not just Anthuriums. The Philodendron here before me, the pinnatilobum, I think it is, affinity. Is it pinnatilobum? Oh, I've forgotten all the names. Yeah, pinnatilobum affinity. There is a crispy leaf here, and that one is also struggling. The Anthurium behind me, the Lancia, you can see that leaf. I've already lost a single leaf on this one. There are two that are still going on that strong, so that should be fine. You can't even see that leaf at the very top there. It's absolutely huge, and I'll leave it there. Same thing goes with the Cromalense. The newest leaf, the big leaf at the back, which you cannot see, is doing fine. It's just these two that are here. There's just a lot of plants. And I really cannot lift the one that's behind you, my Monstera pinnatipartita. So even a Monstera is struggling. It's got a lot of yellowing leaves. Some of my Pipers, interestingly enough, this time round, because I had this happen last time, the Piper ribesioides, I did remember to put it on the list to get watered, and it did get watered. Believe it or not, the bare stem that you're seeing there was from the last underwatering or no watering that happened in the summer, but it's done okay. It's got some new growth in. This one I'm not worried about. However, my Piper sarmentosum, which I'll see if I can bring a picture here. I've also done a video about it. It's the edible Piper that I was talking about, which I was so happy about. My original plant was big and tall and bushy, and I had my backup plant, which is doing better now, my second plant that I got at some point. It's not done an awful lot. I'm waiting for the summer to come in because that one really does need that warmth and those longer daylight hours to kind of bush up. But my original sarmentosum, which was absolutely gigantic, it's probably lost about 80% of its leaves. They've all crisped up and gone. It's still got quite a few leaves. I'm not thinking that that one is dead. It's going to bounce back. It's a fighter. Most of my Pipers tend to be fighters. Like, look at this. Look at all of the leaves of that lost, and it bounced back. So I am confident it's going to be okay. But yeah, that one took a knockback. So yeah, so we've had philodendrons so far that have struggled, monsteras that have struggled, anthuriums that have struggled, pipers that have struggled. I'm trying to see if anything else. Epipremnums did okay in here. The epipremnums in the house, which I thought, you know what, they can probably go. They get watered more or less every week. They can go for 2 weeks. It's a pothos. It's a pothos. It should be fine. It is. It's not going to die. I've now realized, because I had a question a while back where people were getting some yellowing leaves somewhere along the vines, not at the very beginning, not at the very end, and they're just like, what's causing it? I'm just, I don't know, because I've not really had an awful lot of things with pothos. Based on this experience, I would say it's irregular watering, or watering where the plant was expecting to get watered and it didn't get watered, and it's just shedding off some slightly older leaves, maybe not its oldest leaves, bizarrely enough, to make space for newer growth, because it's just been maybe a bit too dry for a bit too long. We're all to blame for kind of using and abusing our pothos plants. You know, it's okay. But yes, there's a lot of plants that have struggled. I'm trying to think here. There is a splendid up there that's also doing really badly, philodendron splendid, but you know. Oh, something that I'm looking at now, and I'll see if I can put a picture here, because I did take a picture and put it on my plant care app, which is very exciting. My Anthurium pedatum has bloomed for the first time. And the really interesting thing about that inflorescence, and it's the first Anthurium that's had this in terms of its inflorescence, the actual spadix, or the spathe, I can't remember now, the long bit, rather than the leafy bit on top. editing memo will give you the real word here rather than memo on a Sunday morning, which brain isn't functioning. Instead of it being like a lighter green or a whitish color that you get sometimes with a lot of Anthurium inflorescences, this one is got like a reddy maroony browny color. So it's really, really, really cool. It's different. I mean, it's not that exciting in the grand scheme of things, but it's kind of cool. Things that did okay, Begonia breviremosa. A lot of the begonias did okay. Now, I said in the beginning that they all shared the common issue. The common issue was basically, in this case, underwatering. Underwatering and being left to dry for too long. And generally, me and everybody else will tell you that, you know what, in the winter you can underwater, it's not as much of an issue. Plants are not used to getting watered as frequently, you can cause root rot if you don't. And this is the fine edge of that sword that a lot of people don't talk about, is yes, you can underwater, and generally you can see, you've seen how much I've reduced the watering in my space in the winter. Reducing it even further, especially when it was as not hot but sunny as it was, and the days are starting to get longer here as well, meant that these plants stay dry, and they stay dry for too long, especially because some of them, even at this stage, might be slowly starting to wake up to start going into their growing season. So context is key. With any advice that you hear from anybody, including myself, online, put it into your own context and use some critical thinking if it's possible at that point and you're not kind of too panicky about it, and just kind of say, okay, this is the reason why this person is saying this. It's kind of potentially valid advice, but in my exact scenario, that might not be the case, which is, and I'll give you this information for free, which is why it makes a lot of people on YouTube or Instagram that does content the same way that I do a bit uncomfortable when people ask us questions. Not because we don't want to answer your questions, but because there's too many variables that we do not know. It's almost nigh to impossible for you to kind of tell us that information over a singular kind of direct message, because you'll sit there going, this is my plant, this is the issue, here's some images, and that's a good bit of information, but realistically that's maybe only 30% of all the information that we could need, and even then we could be wrong, and we feel guilty that we're kind of giving advice out, kind of going, this is my best guess as to what this might be, but I don't know a lot of the other things. Like, I don't know what your climate's like, I don't know what your conditions internally are like, I don't know how they might fluctuate, I don't know kind of what the weather is currently where you are. Like, there's all of these things that play a part, and you and me would do that instinctively, especially if you've been doing this for a while in your own space. Even if you haven't been doing it for a while, you might not notice it, but there are certain things that you've already started to kind of notice when you're going around and kind of checking on your plants and just kind of going, yeah, maybe I shouldn't do this. Like my thing from the last few years, where I'm just like, I do really need to start reducing the watering earlier on in autumn rather than waiting till winter, because by that point the damage is done. That was a good learning, but I got from my space with my plants in my conditions. That might not apply to everybody. Does that make sense? So pinch of salt, a bit of critical thinking, if you can kind of put two and two together in that respect. But it's not for everybody. I know if you're starting off and some people are just not good at thinking in that way, that's understandable as well. But if you can, give it a try. But yeah, so it's the underwatering of it all. And you can see what I meant now, that it's not the individual's fault who was watering my plants, because they did everything that I asked them to do. It's just this idiot should have maybe not been as optimistic about how little watering needed to be done, if that makes sense. But that's fine, because I needed to kind of pare down some of the collection in terms of like, I needed to prune down some of these plants, and I've been dreading it because I just generally don't like pruning as much as I probably should. And this did it for me. Now, things that I'm doing to fix, correct, address the situation, basically. First thing is, obviously, I watered a lot of the plants that I needed to water as soon as I got back. That was an epic watering day. Like, I spent most of the day watering. But let me tell you what I did. Let me pick up the Piper again and show you. So with a lot of the plants, they were bone dry. At that point, the soil was starting to be hydrophobic. And for people that might not know, hydrophobic, this is another Greek lesson for you as well. Idor is water, phobia is fear of, same as phobias. So hydrophobic is it's kind of scared of water. Essentially, it repels water. It becomes so dry that it starts to repel water. You get this a lot of times if you've got cacti and succulents. Even with the cacti and succulents mix, sometimes if you've let it dry out for too long and you put water on, it just spills over the side, basically. It doesn't actually go in. So I was doing, the watering took even longer, regardless of the fact that I nearly had to water every single plant in my collection the day that I got back. I arrived early and I'd already taken the day off work, knowing full well that I was going to spend most of the day watering, and I did, and I spent most of the next day watering as well, so that should tell you something. So I had to do very, very slow watering. So instead of just, like I would normally do, flush everything and it would immediately kind of like water everything and come out the bottom of the pot, I had to go very, very gently and very slowly to make sure, and especially this is where the clear pots came in really, really handy, to make sure that I could see that everything was being saturated, and on top of that, to make sure that I was entirely letting, so kind of tilting the pot like this, letting entirely all of that water come out. I did not want any water sitting on there. So the inclination, if something's been dry for so long, you might be worried about causing root rot because they're going from a very dry environment to a very wet environment. So you're very tempted to just kind of go, I'm just going to give it a tiny little drink. Unfortunately, that's still not the right thing to do, at least in my opinion. It's best to flush, but make sure, absolutely sure, that it is fully drained down and there is no kind of like, it's not turned it into mud, essentially, there, because yes, you've probably lost some roots because they've dried off and died off. There is still going to be that chance of root rot. Do not repot your plant at this point because you will stress it out even more. Accept the loss of those older leaves that might have happened on that plant. You're not going to get those back. Really sorry to tell you this. You can address it if you wanted a slightly shorter plant, if you don't want that much bare stem, depending on how many leaves you've lost up the line. You can just chop it and prop the top of it and let it branch out because you've removed that apical dominance, and you will then get a bushier plant again. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I'm not going to say like, you can do this. No, chop it, prop it if you want it to be bushier. Otherwise, you're just going to have to deal with some barren stems. And such is life. Things like this happen. Plants in nature, I will say this until I am blue in the face, are not perfect. It stresses me out watching other people trying to create perfect plants in their space because I know how stressful it is for them as well. And I'm just like, oh my God, just let the plant be. It's fine. They're going to look busted at some point. It's okay. It's fine. Or if you want to hover that much, maybe don't have a huge collection. Maybe have less. Minimize your stress levels. They don't need to be perfect. It's giving that kind of like parent vibe thing where your kid needs to be a straight A student, otherwise you cannot sleep. Don't care about the kid. They just need to be a straight A student. Breathe, it's fine. It will be fine. We do this as a hobby. It's meant to be relaxing for most of us, so... But yeah, so, sorry, rant. Oh, I woke up spicy this morning. Yeah, it's one of those things that chop it if you want to get it bushier. Otherwise, make sure that you're flushing, make sure that it's draining, because you need to give that moisture back into that plant. The reason why I'm saying it's lost that leaves and it's not going to get it back is, I think I've touched on this on other videos as well. So let me give you an example. This is a very tiny propagation. This is my security propagation of my skeleton key epipremnum. And there's 2 growing points, which is great. So say for instance, I lost, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 leaves on here, 5, 6 if you're counting the new leaves that are coming in. But say I lost, actually no, just numbers on a Sunday. Let's just say I had 10 leaves, yeah? 10 leaves, this is not 10 leaves, but say I had 10 leaves. And I lost about 50% of the roots. I'm gonna have to remove 50% of the leaves. Realistically speaking, not to further stress this plant. If I don't do it, a lot of the times, the plant will do it for you and possibly stress itself out even more doing that. So if it's got 50% less roots, it can't deal with 100% of leaves. It's going to have to get 50% of leaves to be able to come to an equilibrium. It will then keep growing, don't get me wrong, but I have seen this sometimes when if you lose 50% of the roots and you don't remove any of the foliage, you might not lose 50%. The plant might not sacrifice 50% of the leaves. It might lose 60% of the leaves, 70% of the leaves, whilst it's trying to come back into that balance because it's got too many leaves to support with too little roots, which essentially what is happening with most of my plants that have lost those leaves. Those plants just went right, and it's almost entirely old leaves that these plants have yellowed off and dropped off, is because the plant is going, I need to survive. I do not have any water. I need to send my resources, in this situation, the moisture, to my newest growth. Sacrifice all the old growth. It is not serving me at this point. It is actually bringing me down because I cannot provide it with what it needs. And instead of me perishing entirely whilst trying to support all of these leaves, I'm just going to lose some of them. That's fine. So be very careful with that if you can and try to adjust. It's annoying. I am not going to sugarcoat it. It is sad for the people that kind of like get really upset about these things. But what's the expression? There's no point crying over spilt milk. It's time for you to sap up that milk, clean it up and move on and just keep going and it will be fine. I promise you, plants are much more resilient than we ever give them credit for. I'll get off my soapbox now. I think this is a much more preachy-like video than I thought it was going to be, so yes. For the people that say that I don't show you like busted-looking plants often enough, ta-da! There's a whole bunch of busted-looking plants at the moment. The one good thing is, and I'll leave you on a positive before I let you go, my pedatum Anthurium that I'm looking at now with that funky-looking inflorescence has also got a new leaf. So there's been some growth. There's like, I can see my Thaumatophyllum sproseanum has got, so the Philodendron goldii used to be known, has got some new growth. Some of my other pipers are doing really well. My Peltigerum has got a new leaf. There's a lot of stuff that's happening that is positive. But because I usually only ever show you majority positive stuff, I thought, you know what? Let's show the ugly side. Let's show when you make a mistake, what happens, how you deal with it, how hopefully you don't let it get you down and just keep on trucking on really. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this slightly more miserable update. Shit happens. So it'll be fine, my collection will be fine. A lot of these things will bounce back and some of the things that don't bounce back, great. I've got more space for new plants. Silver lining, silver lining, it's fine. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Do you agree with what I said? Do you disagree? Do you do things slightly differently? Ooh, the last thing I was meaning to say earlier on, do not use fertilizer. I will not use fertilizer for these next 2 weeks, basically. I will take, because even though I've been fertilizing very slightly, even in the winter, at this stage with these plants are this stressed, they need to just be getting water for at least a couple of weeks. And then I'll start reintroducing some fertilizer, probably in the form of seaweed extract, which tends to help plants recover a bit more. And then after a couple of weeks of that, transition them into more traditional fertilizer, I don't want to stress them out even more. But yes, that is everything I wanted to cover. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.